home are going to be recorded for posterity.
Yes.
Excellent.
So Dave, this is a global citizenship seminar class. I'll shift a little bit so we're not quite as mega. And the dinosaur up here is we're the raptors. That's not quite a raptor. It's a triceratops, but we'll do what we can. And this is a group of 22 seniors, and they read your bio and know a little bit that you're going to be posted in Jordan soon, and that you're studying Arabic. And one of them that I know has a question about Dubai, but I thought you could talk to them for maybe 7-10 minutes, just a little bit about your career, and then open it up to questions they might have. The last time we met was Tuesday, and we had a conversation about ISIS and whether or not the United States should put boots on the ground and logistically how that might happen. And I said I would defer to someone who works in the State Department to talk about some of the challenges that might pose. So at some point, I think that may come up, but I'll let it go somewhat organically. So if you want to take the stage, and then we'll have folks interact with you, that would be great.
Okay, that's great. I'm happy to also. Sounds like I'm a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe you turn the volume down a little, and I'll talk louder. How's that? Oh, yeah. Okay, that sounds better. So, yeah, when you said you had a dinosaur up there for a sec, I honestly thought you were making a joke about you and me and our use of this technology, but it seems to be working pretty well. So, in any case, yeah, I can talk about, I probably spend the whole session just talking about the career, because there's a lot to say about that. But, I imagine, given that you were talking about ISIS, there might be some geopolitical questions too, and I'm happy to talk about all those issues as well. The only thing I'd say as a disclaimer up front is that everything I say, as I mentioned to you, Steve, when we were emailing about it, is just my own personal perspective. I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire State Department or U.S. foreign policy, or, and if I say anything that may sound critical of the current or past regimes, I don't mean to, cause any political kerfuffles about that. No president's perfect, no person is perfect, no country is perfect. So, just want to get all that out for starters. So as far as the fact that we're going to be posted to Jordan, I'll tell you a little bit about the career and how a person becomes a Foreign Service officer, how I became one, and then we can talk. Then, as you said, I can answer any questions about either the career or the geopolitical stuff. So, I didn't. As Steve probably remembers, excuse me, Mr. Goldberg probably remembers. He may have mentioned you were friends from high school. So, back in those days, I was not really talking much about, oh, I want to be a diplomat someday. I actually, if I said anything, it was probably that I wanted to be a teacher, like you. And for some years, that's actually what I did. I taught high school in New York City. I was teaching English literature, but I also brought a lot of history and politics and actually diplomatic stuff into my teaching as well, because it had always been an interest of mine. And I spent my free summers traveling around the world. I would bring pictures back to show the kids. Always liked studying languages. And so somewhere along the way, I was at some sort of seminar for teachers, and one of the other teachers said, that she was kind of elderly, but she said, if I were still your age and I had it over again, I would take the Foreign Service exam. And I said, the what? Because I knew there was such a thing as U.S. diplomats, but I had no idea how you became one. And it turns out you become one by taking an exam. That's been the case ever since the 1920s. Prior to then, they used to just appoint people the way they still occasionally appoint some ambassadors to some of the more cushy posts usually, or some of the ones that are politically important where they feel like they have an expert, like in the case of Russia or China. So we still do have appointees, but pretty much everybody else just comes up through the system and they have to take this exam that's been in place ever since the 20s. So I took the exam just kind of on a whim, and then I went off to grad school while I was waiting to hear the results of that. I went to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which is based at Tufts. It's affiliated with Harvard, but it's mostly Tufts, and that's one of the good international affairs programs you can go to if you're interested in foreign affairs, but it's not a requirement for becoming a Foreign Service officer. Pretty much all you need is a BA. And so there are some folks who take the exam when they're 21, 22, right out of college, and they can serve a good 25 years or something and retire when they're still in their 50s, getting a full pension, which is not a bad deal. But for myself, I'm actually kind of glad I took the route that I did, because by the time I took the exam, I knew this is exactly what I wanted to do until I became old and gray. I have not been disappointed. It's been a fantastic experience. As you saw from my bio, I've served in 3 overseas posts, and then we've been back here for about 4 or 5 years. We're going to Jordan next year, but we're getting Arabic language training. I don't know if your school offers foreign languages or Arabic, but if so, happy to talk a little bit about language study with folks here. But to me, getting paid to study language makes me feel like I won the lottery. Not everybody feels that way. Some people see it as a cumbersome aspect of the job, but not me. When you join the Foreign Service as a generalist Foreign Service officer, as I am, you can either focus on politics, economics, public affairs, or consular work, which is basically visas and taking care of American citizens. So if one of you guys goes overseas on a student exchange and you lose your wallet or something like that, you might come see the consular officer at the U.S. Embassy. And then the 5th thing you can do is management, which is basically just making the embassy run, making sure, dealing with all the HR stuff, the financial stuff, somebody's toilet breaks down, getting the employees to fix that, I joined as political officer, which traditionally that's the fastest track to the upper echelons, becoming ambassadors and such. That wasn't necessarily why I chose political. I suppose it doesn't hurt. I was really just kind of interested in all the issues, the diplomatic history, all the great game stuff, really fascinating. But my close second was public affairs, because you're talking to young people, students, cultural things, people-to-people connections. That was a real interest for me as well, especially with my teaching background. And as it happens, in Jordan, I will be a public affairs officer. You don't always do your specialty, especially when you are married to another Foreign Service officer, as I am. You have to have some flexibility. She's an econ officer. She's going to be a deputy head of the econ section out there, and so I'm going to be the cultural affairs officer in Jordan. So that's a quick sort of thumbnail sketch of how I got to where I am. But there are a lot of people who take a lot of different routes, and there are a lot of different things that Foreign Service officers do. I've done the kind of traditional thing where I go with the ambassador to a meeting and I take notes and I write it up later as a cable. I think the world got to find out a little bit about what our cables look like around about 5 years ago, thanks to Mr. Assange, which was bad in a lot of ways, of course. And what he did was in my opinion, what was done was basically an attack on U.S. interests and nothing further. And of course, I thought it was terrible. But there was a silver lining to it for us, Foreign Service officers, that now when I try to explain to my parents what I'm doing, they can see. I just do a quick timeout because I'm not sure. Just by a show of hands, you can't see the hands, but I can. How many of you know what he's referring to with Julian Assange? They just tried to Google him. So you may need to give. Can you give a little more background on that? Because unfortunately, what happens is I'll try to make references as well, and because the curriculum is pretty prescribed here, it's a rare student who's following news from 3-4 years ago. So, well, what happened was basically this was the so-called WikiLeaks scandal, and what happened was there was a guy who was working for the Department of Defense, actually, named Bradley Manning, who was going through a lot of personal issues of his own. And while he worked out the personal issues, he decided that he was against everything that U.S. Foreign and/or military policy stood for, and he started feeding sort of secret video clips of the war in Iraq and things like that to a guy named an Australian guy named Julian Assange, who had started this website called WikiLeaks. And it caused a little bit of a stir, but then about 5 years ago, they released a whole bunch of our classified cables, and I should say alleged cables, because we're not supposed to officially acknowledge that that's what they are. I'm not supposed to officially acknowledge that I wrote anything that I saw later when I Googled it. So anyway, that was a pretty weird and surreal experience. If the goal was to get the U.S. to change its policy, of course it failed. If the goal was to hurt the U.S., I think it also failed. But I think it did hurt some of our contacts in some of the countries that we speak to who thought they were speaking to us confidentially. And in some cases, these are human rights activists who could be in danger of retribution or getting killed by the government. So the whole thing was pretty dumb. And it was kind of done in this idea that, peace, love, and grooviness and singing Kumbaya and everything. And it has the opposite effect, because diplomacy, as you'll learn if you study diplomatic history, you can't have diplomacy without secrecy, and you can't have secrecy if idiots like Julian Assange are releasing cables to everybody. So, in fact, in my opinion, what he was doing was contrary to peace, not pro-peace. And you saw the need for secrecy and diplomacy recently, for example, the Iran deal, which is a little more of a recent current event. So hopefully students are following that. So anyway, I've been gabbing on for a while. So why don't I pause here and see what kind of stuff people want to ask me, either about the career or about diplomacy, politics, etc.
Great. I know that's actually, I think that's perfect. And just a show of hands, who has questions? A few. We'll get more. We'll generate more. But when you guys come on up and rock, paper, scissors yourselves, or however you want to do it. But don't waste the time. Jump in the chair.
Don't be shy. Hope you all enjoying the view of my bedroom here, by the way. I did my best to clean it up.
Have you ever been, or I'm Eric Young, a 12th grader at RTHS. Have you ever been in a position where like it's like been threatening for your life or anything like that, or like you've been in danger?
That's a good question, especially because, you know, when I joined the Foreign Service, the way it works when you pass the exam is that you have to wait to get a security clearance. And then once that happens, then you have to wait for them to call your name off the list of people who passed. And they put you in order of how high your score was. So my score was kind of medium to good, so they didn't call me right away. And between that and the clearance, it actually took a while, and I had a lot of time to do a lot of thinking about, you know, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? At the time, I was getting serious with the woman who, you know, became my wife, and she made it clear that she was ready to go with me wherever we got sent, which is part of how I realized it was getting serious. And then, you know, then we had kids a couple of years after that, and so, you know, the whole issue of safety and family became one of the real questions I had to turn over in my mind. It was basically, is this life going to be okay for kids? Am I going to be okay spending all this time overseas, or am I going to get homesick? And thirdly, you know, what happens when I disagree with U.S. foreign policy, which inevitably has to happen. They don't hire unthinking robots in the Foreign Service, so obviously you formed your opinions, and you know I was going to agree with everything that happened. So the way those three things have panned out, the opinion issue hasn't been too bad because it turns out the State Department's filled with a lot of really interesting and lively people, and we have a lot of great discussions. You know, we may put a united front out there in front of the cameras, but you know, I've never felt like I had to, you know, be sort of going along to getting along to get along. So that's been fine. The family thing, you know, the first 7 years of my kids' lives, we came back here. My older son was 7, my younger was 5, and so they don't really remember all those years that well. And then we've been back here since then, and the kids are now 11 and almost 10. So by the time we take off to go to Jordan, they're going to be in middle school. So this will be sort of their first time, like really experiencing the Foreign Service life in kind of a conscious way. And I do worry about taking everybody to Jordan. Jordan has been a good oasis, you know, knock on wood, up till now in the region, but it just seems to be surrounded by instability everywhere. You know, in a lot of places that you go, you get danger pay as kind of a compensation for the fact that you are kind of putting yourself in harm's way. There are some places you can get sent that are actually literally war zones, like Iraq and Afghanistan, and there the tour is only for 1 year. You generally are not allowed to take family members, with the exception of what we call a tandem couple, like my wife and me, both officers. But then we would have to leave the kids with somebody for a year, which, you know, we're not going to do that. Technically, when you join, you sign on the dotted line that basically says worldwide availability. But I think the department knows that most people would rather, you know, there are a lot of people who would rather change careers than do that to their family. For the ones who do that, I admire their fortitude and their sacrifice, and I don't want to take anything away from them. It's just not something that, you know, if I were forced to make that choice, I would want to keep my family together and not split up for a year, especially going to such a dangerous place. But there are a lot of people who do it. There are a lot of perks, you know, in terms of your career and getting paid a lot. And there's a patriotic sense that you're, you know, doing your duty for your country. After all, there are a lot of ways to serve this country, not just with arms. You know, I think that if you, through your work, prevent instability, prevent war, protect U.S. interests, protect U.S. economic interests, you know, you're probably saving as much in lives and money as you are in a lot of other cases, you know, in the military. So, you know, and what we see when we're overseas is that we really work hand in glove with the military. I think back in the States, there tends to often be kind of a divide, especially because we're so bitterly divided politically these days, between people who seem to think the military is a solution for everything. People think diplomacy is a solution for everything. When we're working together overseas, we're all just sort of cut up the same cloth. Where we're like, okay, we're working shoulder to shoulder and doing everything together, and we have respect for each other. And there's not much daylight between us dips and the military when we're overseas. So that's a rather long and rambly answer. But, the bottom line is, you never. There's no such thing as 100% security. The department does the best for us that it can. We do have Marines and Marine guards at our embassies, and a lot of security barriers and things like that, especially since 9/11. But I could also stay home with the curtains drawn and then get cancer. So
Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Hi, I'm Elena. I'm also a senior, obviously. So I was wondering what Arabic training was like for you, and like if it was difficult and how long it lasted.
Well, that's a good question. So I guess I should say that when I joined, a lot of people when they join the Foreign Service, they already have some language from college or from Peace Corps. The people who did Peace Corps, their language is really good from whatever country they were in because they get kind of immersed. In my case, I had done French in high school, some Russian in college, a little bit of Spanish, living in Guatemala, doing volunteer work. And then my wife is originally from Bulgaria. As I mentioned, we met at grad school in Boston at Fletcher School. And she was there as a foreign student, but her English was already completely fluent. And this is because she had gone to a special English language school in Bulgaria. So when we got married, she got her American citizenship. And then because her English was so good, a few years after I joined, she took the exam and she passed as well. And that's how we became tandem. So my wife has recently started Arabic training for her job in Jordan, and she's attacked it with the same zeal that she attacked English language training many years, or English language school, whatever it was in Bulgaria, many years ago. I'm also really zealous about language training. I think a lot of it really comes down to your own level of discipline, because the way it works is we have this sort of almost like a college campus in Arlington, Virginia, called the Foreign Service Institute, FSI. And you can study a lot of different things at FSI, but the main thing is languages. We have leadership and management training and tradecraft and all kinds of other stuff. But the primary thing there is language. And I love walking around FSI and just listening to all the different languages being spoken. Chinese over here, Indian over there, Hindi, or one of the Indian languages over there. So I went to FSI for the better part of a year before my first tour and got Arabic training to go to Dubai. But at the time, I was a junior officer, and usually in your first tour, they don't really expect you to use a language a ton. So they just wanted me to get to kind of a low intermediate level, which I did. Then we came back from there, and our next tour was in Macedonia, where they speak kind of a variant of Bulgarian. Don't tell that to there are any Macedonians in the class. Don't get mad at me, but Macedonian is very much like a dialect of Bulgarian. They don't like to hear you say that. Disclaimer. But I'd already learned a fair amount of Bulgarian because of my wife, and her parents don't speak English. And Bulgarian is similar to Russian, so I kind of had a background that learned Bulgarian. So I didn't really get much training. And my wife, of course, they gave her some Macedonian training, which is kind of funny, since Bulgarian's her native language. But anyway, before we just got like 2 or 3 months at FSI before then, and then before we went to Moscow, I got about 2 or 3 months again of Russian, just as a kind of a top off. But in the case of Jordan, they don't really expect my wife to use a lot of Arabic because in the econ section you deal with a lot of westernized kind of Jordanians, who speak English. So she's going to get about a year or so here at FSI. Then she has to start working. In my case, I'm going to get close to a year here, a little bit less than her because I had the training 10 years ago. But then I get a whole second year in country in Jordan, which I'm very excited about because as you'll find if you've studied any languages, there's no substitute for being in the country. If you really want to get good at a language. I don't know anything about the foreign schools that the State Department kind of works with or partners with. At FSI, the way it generally works is you have about 5 hours a day of class time. There are only about 4, maximum 4 students in each section, which means you can't hide in the corner if you haven't done your homework. And then there's, language lab you're supposed to spend some time in, and the rest is really up to you. There's there's homework, but it's really up to you to kind of go home and pound the vocab. And now there's so many online resources that it's almost hard to know even which to pick. It's not like even like 10, 12 years ago when I was doing Arabic before I went to Dubai, there was hardly anything to work with. Now it's just like there's just fantastic stuff. And I actually found some good podcasts that one guy from Saudi and another from Jordan, I think, put together. And they're very entertaining and fun. They do a dialogue. They break it down for you. I just download those on my iPod Mini and just go for a jog, listen to it. So it's a lot really depends on your motivation. They say in the Foreign Service there are some people who are so into language that will talk to a dead dog on the sidewalk, in the target language just to practice, and that's kind of how I feel about it. The only thing is if you meet a checkout clerk at a grocery store or something who speaks the language that you're interested in, they might get a little paranoid if you start talking to them in that language, especially with all the political stuff surrounding Arabic. Oh, your name is Ahmed. Let's speak Arabic. And I'll be like, oh, who are you with? But I look for any opportunity.
Alrighty, thank you.
Hey.
Hi.
I'm Andy, and I had a question kind of involving your children. How will their education work when they are over in Jordan? Like, will the actual embassy have some sort of schooling for them, or is there some sort of westernized private school that speaks in mainly English and not Arabic, or will they actually have to learn Arabic along with you and your wife?
That's a good question. Generally, this is the case. It was the case in Moscow, and it's also the case in Jordan. There's a school in country that's a private school for locals, and the locals have to pay some kind of exorbitant tuition to go there. But it's basically affiliated with the embassy, and we don't have to pay that same tuition. So for the locals, I think it's kind of like a status symbol or something. I send my son to the embassy school or whatever. They don't call it the embassy school. They call it, in Moscow, it's called the Anglo-American school. I think it's called something similar in Jordan. I should know, but I can't remember. The other thing is that King Abdullah of Jordan is very westernized. Likes to visit the States. Speaks English by all accounts better than he speaks Arabic even. And he created a private school called the King's Academy, which sounds very ritzy, and I think it was sort of modeled after American private schools like Exeter, or, whatever. So you have that option, but you have to pay the difference. The State Department basically will cover, they'll give you a certain kind of education allowance, which is usually sort of indexed against whatever you have to spend at the locals have to spend at that kind of embassy affiliated school. If you're going to send your kids to another school that costs more, you have to basically pay the difference. We in Moscow, I guess my boys were like first grade, kindergarten, something like that. So it wasn't as big a deal. Now they're getting ready for middle school and beyond. You start actually choosing your post based on whether they're the schools that have a good reputation, because you start thinking about getting into college and stuff like that. It's all the instruction's all in English, but I think they have the local language as a subject. Like so in Moscow they had Russian, or they had the option of it anyway. And in Jordan they had the option of studying Arabic. We kind of kept them off the Russian when we were in Moscow because we didn't want them to get confused. My wife spoke Bulgarian when they were growing up, so they would be bilingual. And I can attest to the fact, having learned both Bulgarian and Russian, sometimes when you're dealing with two languages that are similar, it's actually more confusing than if they were completely different. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers it. Okay, thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Hey, I'm Miles, and so you worked in Moscow as the human rights and frozen conflict officer, correct?
Yes.
So how was it like in Moscow?
Well, actually, this is sort of an unorthodox answer to give. We loved Moscow. We absolutely adored it, which is not an answer you're going to hear from everybody. The U.S.-Russian relations are always, seems like they've always been tense. One thing that's interesting about being a diplomat in 2015 is you go back and read books of diplomatic history, which I've started to really enjoy doing. Some of them are so well written that they're as readable as like a detective thriller or something, except everything really happened in history. And I'm reading a really fascinating one right now that was written all the way back in 1989, but it's still relevant now. And it's just like the more things change, the more they stay the same. You know, even in World War One, even long before World War One, during World War One, during World War Two, you know, everybody was worried about Russia. You know, Russia is, and the big thing they were afraid of is Russia going to take over Turkey? You know, because the Ottoman Empire that later became Turkey was just kind of crumbling, and it had that jewel in it of Istanbul, which historically had been Constantinople. Really strategic spot, really key for trade and everything. And it was always like, oh God, the Russians are going to get Constantinople. What are we going to do? And this is all going on even when Russia was our ally, you know. And then as soon as World War II ended, you know, basically the reason NATO got formed was exactly because we were afraid Russia was going to take over Greece and Turkey. I mean, it went beyond that, but that it was, if you look at what Truman was doing in the late 40s, it all had to do with, you know, keeping the bear away, and specifically Turkey and Greece. So, you know, what you see when you deal with the bilateral relations with Russia is it's just going to go up and down and up and down. But there's always going to be an element on the Russian side and on the American side that's just super paranoid about each other. And because of that paranoia, you know, you have things that, you know, the KGB used to harass people. Now the modern version of the KGB is called the FSB. They still harass people. And it's cold in Russia. That's no secret. People can get a little cranky over there. And maybe for those reasons, I don't know. And also the language is kind of difficult. But so for some combination of those reasons, everybody tends to look at Moscow as a terrible hardship posting. And in fact, we did get paid some hardship money to serve in Moscow. But, you know, as Larry Bird once said about playing for the Boston Celtics, this is from Mr. Goldberg's in my generation. You guys probably never even heard of Larry Bird. But anyway, he signed some multi-million-dollar contract, and he said, don't tell him I would have done it for free. That's kind of how I feel about the hardship money we got for going to Moscow. We just had a blast there. It's such a rich culture. It's such an amazing history. Fascinating, obviously, geopolitically, as I said earlier in my answer, Russia never goes out of style. So I always knew that whatever I was writing was getting a readership in Washington. You know, I was writing these analytical cables about where Russia is going, and I was using all 100% of my brain cells to do it. It was just great. I loved it. You know, I got bitten by the Russia bug all the way back in high school. Mr. Goldberg probably remembers our English teacher, Mr. McCarran, who I had. And McCarran assigned me Crime and Punishment, and read it, and that was it. I was hooked on Russia. So I had, you know. What did he say?
You read Anna Karenina as well?
Yep, for Gonson. Yeah. So anyway, I didn't like Anna Karenina as much. I didn't like Tolstoy as much as Dostoevsky. But anyway, so yeah, we just had a great time. But I will say that if, you know, we lived there for 3 years. If I had to spend 3 years in Russia without knowing any of the language, that would have been hard, because you can't even get around on the metro if you don't know Russian. Like, there's just nothing. It's not a tourist friendly place like London or Paris, where everything is kind of designed for the visitor, the traveler. You know, in Moscow, it's a little more you know, advanced on that front. But because we spoke good Russian, you know, we were going out to the theater, to ballet, and the stuff was all really cheap. In America, that kind of thing might cost you $100. In Russia, it was like, you know, 10, 15. I mean, and packed every night. Tuesday night, the place is packed to the rafters. You know, the crowd is just cheering adoringly. You know, one of the great paradoxes of Russia is how culturally sophisticated it is, and then how thuggish its politics are. Please don't quote me on that as an official representative of the State Department, but one does notice a certain degree of, as you know, you mentioned I was the human rights officer. It was tough to see contacts of mine who were under threat, getting beaten up. One person got killed. You know, there was a brief sort of experiment with democracy in the 90s in Russia after communism collapsed. Didn't work out well. There was a lot of poverty in the 90s, large degree because of the communist system had created those conditions, but people still blamed the democratically elected government that was in place. And so then Putin came in and said, okay, well, that democracy thing was nice, but now we're going to do things my way. And to be fair, the 90s were filled with chaos and different mafiosi gangs shooting each other down in the street and so on. So I mean, it was a difficult time, and Putin did clean all that up, but, you know, sort of by making himself the head head mafioso. Again, that's me talking, not the State Department. So anyway, we loved Russia, is the bottom line. In case you're wondering, by the way, because since you guys didn't recognize WikiLeaks, you might not recognize what is meant by frozen conflicts. What that is basically is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, some of the former Soviet neighbors of Russia had little pockets of Russian speakers in them, or people who Russia felt like it wanted to protect for one reason or another. And Russia basically used that as a pretext for staying in, or in some cases moving into that country to kind of establish a foothold that it could use as leverage. So basically it did that. There's a part of Moldova, which is a neighboring country, called Transnistria, a teeny little strip that goes down a river. They held on to Transnistria. They invaded Georgia in 2008 because they said the Georgian president had attacked a certain part of Georgia and they wanted to move in to protect it. I'm talking about the country, not the state, when I say Georgia, by the way. And now recently they're doing the same, taking the same page from the same playbook and moving it to Ukraine, having taken over Crimea and harassing the Ukrainians in the eastern portion of the country. And that stuff has been in the news. So that's in frozen conflicts. Of course, I wasn't trying to single-handedly resolve any of these frozen conflicts, but my job is to kind of report on what was happening with them, analyze them, and also speak to Russian officials to get their perspective and feed that back to Washington so Washington knew what they were thinking. Oftentimes when you write cables after a meeting like that, you're not advocating for what the Russian position is. You're simply explaining what it is so that Washington policymakers can make their decisions based on that. So.
Thank you.
Sure.
You guys want to go ISIS?
Oh, yeah, that's what I was.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Hi,
Hello.
I'm Sarah. I'm a senior also at RTHS. So I had a question. So we were talking about ISIS yesterday and whether the U.S. should really go over there and help out in some sort of way, get our boots on the ground, basically. So I was just curious as to what your opinion on that was.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, sorry to be so repetitive with the disclaimer, but, since you asked me to start out my opinion, I definitely have to say that it's just my opinion. It's not official policy. This is it's an extremely complicated situation. I think I need to backtrack a little bit to point out that there have always been two great strains in U.S. foreign policy. And one of our biggest problems, I think, in our foreign policy since our country began is that we can never seem to make up our mind which one we like better. So either, like most countries, we're realists or we're idealists, right? Now, in the case of most countries, like certainly China and Russia, but I think probably most of our European friends too, there's no debate between your interests and your ideals or your interests and your values. There's just your interests. That's it. That's how it's always been. If you look at the way all the great powers dealt with each other during Napoleonic times, during World War I, I forget who it was who said this. Probably Churchill, because it was him he's the one who said everything. But there, in the geopolitical world, there are no friends, only interests. That's the famous quote, right? The thing about the U.S. though is that we don't really seem to believe in that. We do, and yet at the same time we don't, and it gets us in trouble. So, for example, some of our allies in the Middle East are monarchies that are not democratic, and they may respond to protesters in the street the same way Putin responded, or the same way the head of Venezuela responded. Except we don't get along with Putin. We don't get along with the head of Venezuela. So when they beat people up in the street, we wag our finger and say, bad, bad, bad. Whereas when these monarchies who we're friends with and who we kind of need for various things, when they do that, we just kind of, we criticize them, but we do it in a much more low-key way. And people, are critical of the State Department and say, well, why don't you stand up for our values more? And they have a point. The problem is that, again, we're balancing our interests with our values. In the case of, and what's funny about it is if you look throughout history, this is not a Republican-Democrat thing. The realists, the people who believe we should just be looking at our interests and not worrying about all that value stuff, probably the single greatest example of that is Kissinger, right? And Kissinger was Secretary of State for Nixon, so he's a Republican. And so in those days, if you were going to be kind of hard-nosed and tough and conservative and pragmatic and realistic, it meant you were conservative. It meant you weren't worried about the human rights in some country just because the dictator was beating them up because, hey, we're friends with the dictator and that's our interest. The end. And so Democrats used to be like Jimmy Carter. They used to believe, well, no, this is America. We have our values. We were founded on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and we're a beacon for other countries. And, and and those are the idealists. The greatest idealist ever, not counting Carter, was Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson's the guy who came out after World War I, and actually, he was actually irritating the European powers because at that time they all still had their empires. And he basically said, the heck with your empires. I'm not interested in that. There are a bunch of nation states that need to come out of this. These are people who believe in self-determination and need to have a future for themselves. And so out of the Austrian Empire, you got Czechoslovakia and Hungary and whatever. Out of the Ottoman Empire, you got Jordan and Egypt. Well, Egypt was sort of half ruled by England at that point. But anyway, so you got the idealists like Wilson, you got the realists like Kissinger, right? But what's interesting about it is that over time, and this is where, I don't know if you heard the term neoconservative used in the media, but over time what's starting to happen is you get this type of Republican that's become like Wilson, that everything is all about our values. And they tend to be very interventionist. So if they see something bad going on in a certain part of the world, they say, sound the alarm, send the Marines, send the gunboats, send everybody, let's bomb the bad guys to smithereens. And Obama is actually, no one likes to admit this either among Democrats or Republicans, but personally I think Obama has more in common with Kissinger, and by the way with Bush Sr., than he does with a lot of Democrats. And so you got Kissinger, Bush Sr., and Obama all kind of in the same category. You got Wilson, Jimmy Carter, and I would argue in some ways Bush Jr. in another category. Where Bush Jr. was much more interventionist. People who were opposed to the Iraq War said that he didn't think about our interests at all. All he thought about was, well, people who really didn't like him said he just went in there to make us look good, something like, make himself look good, basically. But other people who were less harsh said, well, he was thinking about our values and not our interests. And it's true that coming out of the Iraq War, our interests have not been served well because Iran has, became more powerful as a result of the Iraq War. Now, Obama being the ultimate Kissinger-type realist, he, has made this deal with Iran now, the same way that Kissinger would have made a deal with the Soviet Union, or Kissinger opened up China, which he did. China had been communist, and we had no relations with them until Kissinger came along. So I think that Obama, basically, what the bottom line is, Bush Jr. got criticized for being too interventionist in the case of Iraq. Obama has now been criticized for being insufficiently interventionist in the case of Syria. But I think Obama basically took a look at that situation, and his question is always, yeah, we have our values, but what is our interest? What are we going to get to keep America more safe and more prosperous if we send our young men and women into harm's way in Syria? And the American people have so much war fatigue after Iraq and Afghanistan that there's little appetite for, as we say, boots on the ground kind of intervention in Syria. I think Obama's feeling has been, let's contain ISIS and let's continue, as we have since 9/11, all of our vigilance about terrorism. And that's a much better use of our blood and treasure than as he would think of it, kind of recklessly barreling in there. But it's not a question with an easy answer at all. We have been trying to train, as I'm sure you know, we've been trying to train Syrians who are not connected with the Assad government and who are also not connected with Assad, who are just kind of normal people like you and me, to fight both sets of bad guys at the same time, because Assad is a horrible dictator. This is the leader of Syria I'm talking about. He's done just unspeakable things to the Syrian people ever since the conflict started in 2011. And it's appalling. I mean, even the ultimate realist, even Kissinger says we have values of some kind, right? And it's repugnant to our values that this guy is getting away with this stuff and we're not doing anything to him. So, it's hard to live with. It's hard to look at the images of these people every day in the paper and think we have the power to stop this. I'll tell you on a personal level, I came from, my ancestors came over from what was then Russia because the Tsar was persecuting Jewish people. They were basically like the Syrians who are going to Europe now. They came to America America let them in, and now I'm living this nice life over here, reading about the Syrians in the paper. It gets my conscience, man. I have to admit it. It really does, you know. But then when I start thinking about, okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to get ourselves into, you know, a quagmire, go in there. You know, I mean, one of the things that, in my opinion, that led to the rise of ISIS in the first place, you know, ISIS would lose all its oxygen if it didn't have the propaganda, right? And what's its propaganda? Well, America's the great enemy of the Muslim world. Well, how did they? What's their evidence for us being the great enemy of the Muslim world? Well, you know, the war in Iraq. So we go into Syria, we're just feeding into that, right? Whereas if we do what Obama does and just let the world see, you know, how disgusting ISIS is in every imaginable way, that's all the propaganda against them you need. They supply their own propaganda against themselves just by being who they are. But it's not a satisfactory situation. I'm a little bit optimistic now because I'm hoping that some way can be found to get Assad out of power that won't involve an invasion or a new war. And frankly, this is the realist in me talking, but you know, I've seen a lot of news reports that Russia is kind of beefing up its presence in Syria, and a lot of people take that as something ominous. In my opinion, I mean, I could be proven wrong, but I kind of feel like that might actually be good, because what it means is Russia is starting to make its peace with the fact that Assad, who's their little buddy over there, is going to go. And they want to engineer his departure in a way that doesn't hurt their interests, and that's why they're kind of deepening their footprint there. And if that's true, that means, you know, Assad's days are numbered. You know, maybe we can get him in front of the International Criminal Tribunal someday, who knows? You know, and if Russia feels like, well, they need to install some other person who's going to be friendly to them, but is not going to massacre his own civilians, and is not going to give ISIS, you know, a reason to exist, then, you know, we could end up coming out of that with something good. And the other thing is that now that we're dealing with, you know, Iran, the Iran deal was just nuclear, and, you know, Iran is still sponsoring terrorist groups like Hezbollah. They're still doing a lot of bad stuff, but we can start to deal with Iran diplomatically, the way we have with Russia and China over the years. And if we do, then maybe Iran can also feel like, okay, maybe we don't have to, you know, stick to Assad, you know, because I think if Assad, if we can find a graceful exit of some kind for Assad, I think that will start to diffuse ISIS. And I think it'd be more intelligent than just barreling in there, guns blazing. So that's my opinion anyway. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm also a senior.
Nice to meet you.
So my question sort of is changing topics a little bit, but you said you were a literature teacher, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, because I love reading and I love books. So do you have a favorite book or a book that influenced your life the most?
Yeah. Well, I could talk at great length about all the books I've loved and the ones that have influenced me the most. And I have to say, I love anytime I see someone young who loves books. It restores my faith in humanity, because with all this electronic stuff these days, you know, it's forever a, you know, a tug of war between me and my kids. You know, put down the iPad, pick up a book. You know, so. But in any case, yeah, you know, I mentioned earlier that Crime and Punishment kind of got me going on this whole Russia thing. In terms of literature, I guess also when I was in high school, I started reading some of the French existentialists, particularly Sartre, and then later in life, Camus. And they still really, you know, to this day, you know, anything I pick up by Camus just kind of rocks my world. And then, let's see, what else? Now, The Great Gatsby has got a Great Gatsby and some of Hemingway's stuff have very favored place on my shelf. But a lot of that came later. I wasn't really that into. I read Gatsby in high school. I'm embarrassed to say, Steve/Mr. Goldberg will remember this, but we would get these AP English assignments or whatever it was, you know, do outside reading over the course of a month. And then, you know, it'd be the night before it was due, and you go, oh no, you know, my outside reading. So you find something short. So I did that with The Great Gatsby, wrote some half-baked paper about it, got, I don't know, a B or something. The teacher was pissed at me, you know. And then later in life, I became a teacher, and I reread Gatsby in order to teach it. And I was like, holy crap, this is the best thing I've ever read in my life. And I felt that way about Gatsby ever since. I mean, I've reread it a bunch of times. And every word in that book is like a jewel. I mean, the reason it's so short is because he just polished it so, it's just an amazing piece of craftsmanship. I was also influenced by a lot of poetry. That was more when I was in college. I started reading a lot of the romanticists like Keats and Wordsworth and Coleridge. I like William Carlos Williams a lot on the poetry front. One of the fun things about being in the Foreign Service is you can start reading the literature of every country that you're going to go serve in. So for example, when I got assigned to Russia, I kind of reindulged my old love of Dostoevsky, except by that time I was able to start reading it in the original, which is really awesome because there's no substitute for reading something in the original. If you can get to the point where you can understand it, you don't have to keep running to the dictionary all the time. But in addition to the Dostoevsky, I started reading I read a lot of Chekhov before we went to Russia. I read a little bit of Solzhenitsyn, although that's kind of modernist. What else? I love the book Catch-22. I don't know if you ever read that. Fantastic book, really funny. Vonnegut. My wife is big into Vonnegut. I like Vonnegut too. What else? I don't know. I'm kind of and I guess Twain. I kind of started getting into Mark Twain over the years too. Kind of doubling back to my American roots, I guess, because for many years I was reading all this foreign stuff, and then I kind of got back into the American. What about you? What books do you like?
I really like young adult literature because I'm a teenager. There's this really beautifully written book called The Strange and Beautiful Stars of Ava Lavender, and that's probably one of my favorites.
Yeah, I've heard of that book. I'm trying to get my guys into young adult literature. They're a little young for it still, since they're 11 and 9. But I remember reading Judy Blume when I was their age.
Yeah.
It was educational, shall we say? Yeah.
You.
Sorry, what's that?
Oh no, I thought you were done. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, that's all.
We have about 3 minutes left. Do you have one final? You don't have to. All right. Okay. I thought you were. So thank you so much. You got a quick one? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Brian.
Hi.
Here. I was wondering what your first culture shock was, or what you think about that term, I guess.
That's a very interesting question. First culture shock. Now I'm kind of going back in my memory because, I started traveling when I was fairly young. I guess the first time I went somewhere where it felt really weird, but weird in a good way, but like just completely alien, had to be the fall. I graduated college in the spring of 1990, and the fall of 1990, which was a long time ago, the Soviet Union still existed, and I actually was able to, through friends of friends, get a visa to go and visit the Soviet Union as a tourist, which was not easy to do with the Soviet Union. And I was walking around, and it was just like everything was just so different. But I was at the age where the weirder something was, the happier I was about it. So I was just kind of eating it up. But it was definitely different from anything else I'd ever seen before. As far as culture shock is concerned, I think the most profound culture shock I ever experienced was marrying someone from a different country. Because it's one thing to just chat with somebody on a train, like you're like, you're traveling through Russia on a train and you're sharing some vodka with a Russian, and practicing your Russian and playing cards and whatever. That's fun, but you're not really getting into like seeing all sides of a person, kind of. When you get married to someone, you get to know each other very well, all your quirks and everything, And I hit it off very well with my wife's parents, but nonetheless, watching my family interact with her family, I said, wow, these are people who come from different planets, and it's very easy for a person to think, something is an insult when it's not meant that way, just because in their own culture it would be taken that way. So that was, of course, by that time I was already like in my mid-30s or something. So I probably had other instances of culture shock before that I'm just not remembering. That was one that, hit home, so to speak. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
So, thank you. Thank you so much. I have to let these guys go in a minute, but I was going to follow up, and we can do it via email. But just as you're preparing to go to Jordan, and we're going to be doing a unit looking at Islam, sort of what are some things you're thinking about? Don't answer that now, but I'll follow up via email. But thanks so much. It was great to talk with you. And as these guys filter out, we can just talk. You and me. Yeah, cool.
It was a real pleasure, and feel free to pass my email address along to them if they want to write to me individually as well. If they have questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Hi.
So are you able to chat with me a little bit now, or do you have to run?
Say again?
Are you able to chat now, or do you have to run?
You're welcome. I'm not getting the sound anymore.
Oh. Let's see.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Send us pictures.
Okay.
My sound somehow cut off.
Oh, can you hear me
Can you
now?
hear me?
Yeah.
No, it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Say something?
Okay. Yeah, I can still hear you.
Oh, you're muted. Go up there.
No, I'm not. No, he can hear me. I just can't hear him for some reason.
Yeah, no, I'm not muted though.
I hear you now.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay.
So, are you able to chat now, or do you have to run?
I have another. It's crazy schedule. I have another class coming in 5 minutes. But yeah, Jocelyn said to say hello. Jocelyn Glazier,
Tell her to say hi as well.
and we have an 8-year-old. So just one though.
As the Jordanians say, mashallah. May God protect.
Cool. Well, it's great to see you. You look awesome. And yeah, maybe we can find are you like some evening? Do you want to we just talk on the phone? We don't have to video.
Yeah, yeah, it's been ages since we talked, man.
Yeah. I'm usually free after 9 o'clock any night. So I'll email you and we can find a time.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, just drop me a line and we'll figure out a time to chat. Just us grown-ups. And
When do you leave? When do you leave for Jordan?
not until next summer.
Next.
Next summer.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. But your language and turning is much more. It's like 5 hours a day coming up soon.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't actually, for me, it will not start until November, and then it will go until July, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thanks so much. I got to shift into U.S. history mode, but
Okay, Steve. Well, it was great seeing you and your students. They're really sweet kids, and let's talk soon.
I was broadcasting a whole.